Hey guys, welcome back to the fifth part of our Adobe XD series. Today we will see how padding and stacks work in Adobe XD. So here I have a button. It's a simple button, but it simply has a label and it has a background behind it. Let's say I wanted to use the design throughout my site, and I come in and select that button. And I'm just going to hold the shift key and the option key to press and drag a second copy. I will release the mouse with those keys held down, and then let's do that a second time. I will press and drag to have a third button. If I wanted to come in and change the size of the button the way normal designs do, let's say simple button happen to be smaller, we'll call it little. So I had a little button, and in other instances it might be bigger. So this is a bigger button. You can see how tedious it becomes to go back to each instance of the button and try to make sure that the padding that exists on the left, right of the button design grows or stays constant or reduces depending on the design that I have. So what I want to do is come in and duplicate this initial button. I will select it, and then again holding shift and control, I am going to press and drag a second one on the canvas and then release. Next, what I want to do is come in and select those two objects. One of the rules is to just keep in mind when it comes to any of the content aware layout features, padding, stacks and responsive resize, is that you need to group the objects before you can apply that feature. So the first thing I want to do is group these two objects together. I am going to open up the layers panel. With these two selected, I am going to right click on the design canvas and select group. I could always use commands or Ctrl plus G. Now that I have saved that as a group, I can give it a friendly name. We can call this as a button. Now that I have saved it as a group, I am ready to apply the padding feature. So with the group selected, here in the properties inspector under layout, there is responsive resize stacks and then padding. I am going to go ahead and check the padding checkbox, and an interesting thing happens. XD is going to examine the content that's within the group and is going to look at any of the objects that sit on top of the backmost layer within the group. That backmost layer is assumed to be background in your design, and it's going to look at the space around the objects that sit on top of the background and define those as padding. I can override these values, but this is the auto magic, in a sense intelligence that XD uses as I work with this feature. So notice that I can see here in the properties inspector that as we expected, the space to the left and right is different than the top and the bottom. In fact, I can click here in the properties inspector and I get a very light pink highlight showing me which part of the object the padding applies to. So that's 12. If I hit tab, I have got 52 on the right, I have got 11 towards the bottom and then 53 towards the left. So pretty good, but I actually want to adjust my design because I didn't quite afford enough padding consistently on the top and the bottom. So I'll just go ahead and come in and zoom in a little bit more tightly so that I can see the details. There's a way to visually adjust padding for a group of objects that's pretty fun. So I'm going to click off here, and then on the keyboard I'm going to hold down the letter S and I'm going to hover over the object. So as I hover over to select it here, I'm going to click once to select it. Once I'm inside the object, because I have clicked on it that first time, I get a heavier pink indicator letting me know that I am on the lower pad. If I roll over here to the right and the top, I can continue to see the padding that is defined for each of these areas visually. What I have the ability to do is see how that one is 10 and then above one is 11. I can just press and drag In this case, I am going to drag down to reduce that padding. I could drag up to increase it, which would look terrible. I will go ahead and drag down until I get to, let's say, 10 as far as the value goes. So that's a visual way of doing it. I could have come here in the properties inspector and just change the values numerically. That could have worked as well. Notice I have the ability to make all of the padding the same on all sides of the object. If I do that, it looks pretty awful. So I'm not going to. I will go back to the padding on each side and make sure I have those values. We'll go 10, 20, 10 and then 20 again. Alright. Now that I have that set and defined for the button, I can come in and duplicate it. So I'm just going to press and drag the second and third version, and let's go ahead and zoom back out so we can compare it to the bad situation on the left hand side. I have got simple button here. When I come into the label now and change this to say little, notice that is a very little button, but at least the spacing is being respected that I defined for the button above. For the last one of course, this is a bigger button. Notice how it's just resizing the way you could think it should and respecting any of the padding that we have defined here. Now I have alluded to this a little bit, but all of that content-aware layout features really start to work with one another. So let's go on and talk about the next one, which is stacks. And we are going to continue to revisit padding and stack as we start to build on the features and they combine together. So I'm going to go ahead and magnify this artboard that has some sample content for stacks. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the layers panel. And I will move this into stacks. And I will move this into position just a little bit. So earlier on we talked about content aware layout and how it works with the three features: padding, stacks and responsive resize. Padding is almost a child feature of the stack feature. What the stack does is allows you to take groups of objects and treat them almost as tiles, so that you can move the content around freely within that stack. If you are organizing your content so that you can reuse it a lot in your design, taking the time to really define these controls is going to be really useful and allows you to design much more quickly. So let me show you what I mean. I have got this set of images and content here. They almost appear like tiles and I want to treat them that way. So the first thing I will do is come in and I'm going to group them so they are a separate group of their own. So here in the layers panel I can see I have three groups or three individual tiles. What I do now is treat them like a stack. So I'm going to come and select all three of the group objects, and here in the property inspector in the layout section, notice I have the stack feature and padding. And I check stack, it's going to automatically apply padding to the selected set. Now when we talk about padding, I mentioned that the backmost layer in a group becomes the outer bound and the padding would be inside from these outer bounds. Because of the example we are looking at don't have background, the padding is set to 0. I can always add padding if I want a little bit of built-in space around my objects. That can be quite useful. I'm going to leave it as a padding value of 0 for now. When I check the stack checkbox, notice that there are two icons here on the right and the one towards the left is selected. What happens is XD is going to analyze the contents that I have want to treat as a stack and try to make a guess if it seems as though I am moving the content up and down, vertically or across horizontally. I can always override that by toggling to the other icon, but XD is going to usually guess things pretty correctly. And in this case it definitely did. Now that I have defined the stack feature of all the individual tiles, what I want to do is save this as a larger group and set that as a stack as well. I have grouped them already and I have give this a friendly name. We could hit at the feature tiles, and here in the properties inspector once again I am going to define this as a stack, and I still want it to stack on the vertical. I can come in now and start to tunnel inside the group and interact with it. So if I double click on this first tag, it's going to tunnel me into the group, and I can see where I am here in the layers panel on that first tag. I can now come in and press and drag and notice that they move out of each other's way. So when it is stacked, it in essence has bumpers that kind of sort of move it out of the way for me. Now as I'm working, I can align the objects horizontally in a different location if I want, but as I move it up and down, it's going to always really keep it in a sense within that stack. I have the ability to come in and control the spacing between my objects within the stack, similar to what I did with padding. So I can always hover a space and press and drag it. If I want them to be the same spacing, I will hold the shift key and press and drag to make sure that the space within that stack is consistent. So that's the end of our fifth video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye.